the Eternal Valentine. The rain slashed against the windows, a ceaseless rhythm that mirrored the turmoil in Emma's chest. Her house, perched on the edge of the forest, seemed smaller tonight, as if the shadows pressing in from the outside were drawing it tighter around her. The light from the old desk lamp was dim, barely illuminating the chaos of sketches and paints that covered her work table. She hadn't finished a piece in months, her inspiration buried alongside the heartbreak Victor had left behind. She almost didn't hear it over the storm, the faint tap-tap-tap against the glass of her front door. At first, she thought it was the wind throwing branches against the porch, but then it came again, a rhythm too deliberate to dismiss. Her breath hitched. Emma hesitated, the unease prickling her skin at odds with the rational part of her mind. She tightened the cardigan around her shoulders and stepped into the hallway, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. The porch light flickered, weak and inconsistent, barely casting enough glow to reveal what lay beyond the door. As she unlocked it, a rush of cold air swept in, carrying with it the metallic scent of rain and earth. There was no one there, but at her feet lay an envelope, stark red against the damp wood. She crouched, fingers trembling as she picked it up. The paper was smooth and oddly warm, as if it had just been held. The flap was sealed with wax, a deep crimson impression of a heart. Something about the weight of it felt wrong. Emma hesitated again, her pulse quickening, but her curiosity burned hotter than her fear. Inside was a card, ornate and elegant, with golden calligraphy that seemed to shimmer as her eyes moved over the words. "Our love will last forever." There was no signature, no indication of who had sent it, but the faint scent of roses clung to the paper, a fragrance so familiar it made her dizzy. Her mind immediately conjured Victor, his smile, his laugh, the way he had held her on their last Valentine's Day together. But that was impossible. Victor had been gone for a year, his death sudden and unrelenting as the storm outside. The wind howled, and Emma startled as the lights flickered overhead. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch, the walls closing in for a moment before the power steadied. She placed the card on the kitchen table, her hands clammy and cold. The storm outside picked up, a symphony of crashes and whispers that seemed to echo from every corner of the house. Emma told herself it was the weather, just the weather. But as she tried to sleep that night, the scent of roses lingered, and she could have sworn the shadows moved with purpose, shifting closer as she drifted off. Emma awoke to the soft creak of floorboards. The house was still, but the air felt heavy, saturated with something unspoken. She sat up in bed, her breath fogging in the unusually cold room. Pulling the blanket around her shoulders, she moved cautiously to the window. The storm had passed, leaving the forest glistening in the pale morning light. She squinted, her gaze drifting to the front porch. Another envelope lay there. Her stomach turned as she opened the door, the chill biting at her skin. The envelope was identical to the first, crimson red with a wax-sealed heart. Inside, the message was shorter, but no less disquieting. "I am with you." Emma's grip tightened, her nails leaving crescents in the paper. She searched the street, the tree line, even the forest for any sign of someone lingering. But there was nothing, only the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. The day passed in a haze. She avoided the card, leaving it on the table next to its predecessor. Yet no matter where she moved, that scent of roses seemed to follow, sweet and cloying, as though the flowers themselves were decaying in some hidden corner of her home. By dusk, her unease had grown unbearable. She called her closest friend, Claire, hoping for some rational grounding. But as Emma described the cards, her friend's laugh was airy, dismissive. "It's probably just a prank, Emma. Valentine's Day is next week. Kids love messing around. Forget about it." That night, she found a third envelope. This one was in her art studio, perched on her easel as if it had been waiting for her. She hadn't been in the room all day. Her heart pounded as she unfolded the card, the familiar golden script sending chills down her spine. "You'll see me soon." The room darkened as a single bulb flickered above her. The shadows stretched once again, long fingers clawing at the corners of the room. She stumbled back, bumping into the table and knocking over a stack of brushes. They clattered to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo far too loudly in the silence. Her phone buzzed, and she nearly screamed. It was Claire. Relief flooded her as she answered, her voice trembling. "Claire, Static, loud and crackling, swallowing her words. Then, faintly, beneath the interference, came a whisper. "I'm here, Emma." The line went dead. Emma dropped the phone, her body rigid with terror. A sudden knock at the door sent her heart lurching into her throat. But when she peered out through the peephole, no one was there. Only the faint outline of a fourth crimson envelope, sitting ominously on the welcome mat. As she knelt to pick it up, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She felt it before she saw it, a presence unseen but undeniable, lurking just beyond her reach. The forest seemed to shiver, the air pregnant with dread. The card's message was simple, yet devastating. Forever. By the third night, the air in Emma's house felt suffocating. She kept every light on, though it only made the shadows seem darker, deeper. The crimson envelopes were stacked neatly on the kitchen table, their presence like an open wound in her home. She had tried to ignore them, to toss them into the trash or bury them in a drawer, but each time she turned away, she found them back in the same spot, perfectly aligned as if waiting to be read. Her sleep was restless and thin, plagued by vivid dreams of Victor. In her dreams, he was alive, standing in the meadow where they had picnicked on their last anniversary. He looked the same as he had then, his dark hair unruly, his smile warm. Yet his eyes were wrong, too bright and too dark at once, like the sheen of oil on water. "Emma," he had said in the dream, his voice achingly familiar, yet tinged with something hollow. "I promised we'd be together forever." She woke gasping, the scent of roses clinging to her skin like sweat. That night she heard him. At first, it was a faint whisper carried on the draft through the hallway, too soft to make out. But as she lay frozen in her bed, the voice grew stronger, closer. It called her name, slow, deliberate, dripping with intimacy. "Emma." Her breath caught as the shadows at the foot of her bed thickened, coalescing into a figure. Victor stood there, his outline blurred like a smudged painting. His face, though partially obscured by darkness, was unmistakable. "You're not real," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't real." He tilted his head, his smile both tender and chilling. "You brought me back, Emma. You called to me." "No," she cried, scrambling back against the headboard. "I didn't." He stepped closer, the air in the room growing colder with each movement. "The cards," he murmured, his voice like a caress. "They bound us. You read them, and now you've opened the door." Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." Victor's shadowy form knelt at the edge of the bed, his hands resting lightly on the mattress. "I never left you, Emma. I've been waiting, and now we can be together again." The words, meant to be comforting, filled her with a bone-deep terror. His presence was wrong, an uncanny imitation of the man she had loved. "I don't want this," she said, her voice cracking. Victor's face darkened, his expression twisting into something colder, more dangerous. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice low and sharp. "You promised me forever, and forever doesn't end." With that, he vanished, leaving Emma alone in the freezing, suffocating darkness. Emma spent the next day in a haze of fear and desperation, scouring the internet for any explanation, any solution. She found references to binding rituals, spells, and pacts made in moments of grief or desperation. Among the clutter of folklore and occultism, one phrase stood out. A bond forged in love becomes unbreakable in death. Her fingers trembled as she dug deeper, unearthing whispers of rituals that tethered spirits to the living world. The more she read, the more certain she became. Victor had done something before his death, something to ensure their connection wouldn't end. The final pieces clicked into place when she stumbled across her old journals. One entry, dated 2 weeks before Victor's death, chilled her to the core. Victor has been acting strange lately. He talks about forever like it's something tangible, something we can seize. Last night, he mentioned an old ritual, one that could keep us together beyond this life. I laughed it off, but there was a look in his eyes. I've never seen him so serious. Emma's breath hitched. This wasn't just her grief manifesting, it was real. That evening, she mustered the courage to return to her studio. Her heart pounded as she pushed the door open, expecting to find Victor waiting. The room was empty, but her easel had been moved. Beneath it, the floorboards were loose, as if they'd been recently disturbed. Her pulse quickened as she pried them up, revealing a hollow space. Inside was a small box, ornate and heavy, its lid engraved with a heart surrounded by thorny vines. Emma opened it with trembling hands. Inside lay a blood-red gemstone, shaped like a heart, its surface faintly pulsating as if alive. A wave of nausea washed over her as she realized what it was. The anchor. This was the object binding Victor to her, the vessel for his promise of eternity. Victor's voice echoed behind her, soft and commanding. "Don't touch it." Emma whirled around, clutching the gemstone to her chest. He stood in the doorway, his form more solid than before. The edges of his figure no longer blurred, and his eyes burned with an unnatural light. "You don't understand, Emma," he said, stepping closer. "That stone is our love. It's what binds us. Without it, I'm nothing." She backed away, her resolve hardening. "This isn't love, Victor. This is obsession." He stopped, his expression flickering between sorrow and fury. "I did this for us. For you. You said you'd never leave me." Emma shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't want this. I didn't ask for this." His form shimmered, the shadows around him growing darker. "If you destroy that stone, Emma, you'll destroy me." Her grip on the gemstone tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The house seemed to groan as she raised the stone above her head. Victor's scream was inhuman, a sound that shook the walls and rattled her bones. But she brought the stone down with all her strength, shattering it against the floor. The world seemed to hold its breath. Victor's form dissolved into the air, his anguished cry fading into silence. The shadows receded, and for the first time in days, the house felt still. Emma sank to the floor, sobbing. She was free. But as she sat there in the silence, a single crimson petal drifted down from nowhere, landing softly at her feet. A final whisper brushed her ear, cold and intimate. "Forever doesn't end." Emma couldn't sleep that night. Though Victor was gone and the house had fallen into an eerie quiet, the tension in the air hadn't lifted. The darkness felt thicker, heavier, as if it were alive and waiting. She wandered the rooms aimlessly, her footsteps echoing too loudly in the stillness. The shattered fragments of the blood-red gemstone remained in the studio where she had left them, their jagged edges glinting faintly under the moonlight seeping through the window. The whispers began again just past midnight. They were faint at first, like a distant breeze brushing through the trees. But soon they grew louder, circling her, filling the house with a low, melodic hum. Emma pressed her hands to her ears, desperate to drown them out. But the voices pierced through, relentless and cold. "Emma, you promised. Forever. Her pulse quickened. She stumbled into the kitchen, the overhead light flickering erratically as she searched for some sense of reality. The crimson envelopes were gone, disappeared without a trace, but the smell of roses lingered, stronger than ever, its sweetness almost suffocating. The shadows in the corners of the room began to move. At first, Emma thought it was her exhaustion playing tricks on her, but as she stared, the darkness writhed, shifting and twisting like smoke caught in an unseen wind. It pooled together, forming a shape, a tall, looming figure with a face half concealed in shadow. The thing that had been Victor, but it was no longer him. His features were distorted, stretched into a grotesque parody of the man she had loved. His eyes were hollow voids, leaking wisps of darkness that coiled like serpents in the air. When he smiled, it was too wide, splitting his face in a jagged line that bled black ichor onto the floor. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" the thing said, its voice layered with countless others, all speaking in perfect, dreadful unison. Emma stumbled back, the kitchen counter pressing into her spine. "You're gone. I broke the stone. I destroyed you." The thing tilted its head, a mockery of Victor's familiar gesture. "You only sever the tether, Emma, but forever. Forever can't be undone." The house groaned around her, the walls trembling as shadows poured from every corner, thick and heavy as smoke. The temperature dropped sharply, frost creeping along the windows and curling up the walls. Her breath came in visible gasps, the air around her growing thin and sharp. "What do you want?" she choked, her voice trembling. The thing moved closer, its presence overwhelming, its shadow stretching long and thin like claws across the floor. "You invited me back, Emma, and now you'll keep your promise. We will be together." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't love. This is madness." The figure laughed, a sound that splintered the air like broken glass. "Love is madness. You taught me that." Emma's legs buckled, and she fell to the floor, scrambling backward as the darkness advanced. The edges of her vision blurred, the shadows seeming to reach for her, to pull her under. In her desperation, her hand landed on something cold and sharp, one of the gemstone's fragments. She seized it, holding it up like a talisman. The shard pulsed faintly in her palm, as if responding to her touch. The thing hesitated, its form wavering for the briefest moment. "Is this what you're afraid of?" Emma demanded, her voice rising with a surge of defiance. "You can't exist without this, can you?" The figure snarled, its distorted face twisting with fury. "Don't you dare!" Emma gripped the shard tighter, the edges biting into her skin, and raised it above her head. "If forever means this, I'd rather it end." With all her strength, she drove the shard into the floor. The reaction was immediate and violent. The house erupted with sound, a deafening cacophony of screams and roars that shook the very foundation. The figure writhed, its shadowy form splintering and fracturing like glass, pieces of it scattering into the air. The darkness recoiled, pulling away from Emma and retreating into the corners of the room. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the entire house were holding its breath. The figure let out one final, guttural scream before it imploded, collapsing into itself and disappearing entirely. Silence fell. Emma lay on the floor, her chest heaving, the shard still clutched in her bloodied hand. The room was still, the air heavy with the scent of roses, but the shadows no longer moved. She had won, or so she thought. As dawn broke, Emma stepped onto the porch, the pale light washing over her weary face. For the first time in days, the world felt normal, the oppressive weight lifted. But as she turned to go back inside, something caught her eye. A single crimson envelope lay on the welcome mat. Emma froze, her blood running cold as she reached for it. The wax seal was cracked, and inside was a single line, written in golden script. Forever doesn't end.